Here we go.
Vice President Kamala Harris back in the United States this morning after a trip to Guatemala and Mexico.
Joe, pay attention.
I keep forgetting I'm president.
The problem that Kamala Harris has experienced in her political career is that she leans so heavily into this sort of lib femme, girl boss, yes queen type approach.
I keep forgetting I'm president.
I think there's a serious, significant rise in major violent crime beginning last year. Yes, I do.
What do you think has caused that?
There are a lot of factors here. Of course, the biggest one being the pandemic.
So you think the pandemic's more of a root cause than declaring war on the police?
No, sir, I don't know.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
And his vote of
patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Bryan Fischer.
Lights are hot. Howdy, and welcome to a brand new broadcast edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Bryan Fischer is my name, your host. Congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent. As always. Jeff and Bobby back in the house, the three amigos writing at full strength. Bobby and I effervescent to have Jeff Reed back in the house after missing him yesterday. Good to be at full strength. So welcome to Focal Point. Good to have you in the conversation today. Do not forget, if you like Focal Point, subscribe to the podcast so you never need to miss an episode. You get an alert when the next one is available. Try to get these things posted by about a half hour or so after the program is over, trying to get them up as quickly as we can. You can also audio stream the program live at afr.net, and you can audio and video stream the program two places: on our Focal Point Bryan Fischer Facebook page and on the Focal Point YouTube channel. Email address, if you want to contact me that way, focalpoint@afa.net. Follow me on Parler and on Twitter, same handle, at Bryan J. Fischer. Also want to remind you, if you go to the AFA store, got a new URL for it, new internet address. It's resources.afa.net. That's the new AFA bookstore. The old URL, afastore.net, that will work for a while until the transition is complete. But you can get a copy of my book, The Boy to Man book there. You can get your version of the Focal Point t-shirt, wear it, and with pride. I was going to wear it and share it, but wait a minute. We don't want people sharing t-shirts with each other, so scrap that. That's what happens when you go off the cuff instead of off of a script. All right, let's go to the Word. Get our nautical charts, get our bearings from the Word of God. Let's go to John 19. We're at the end of John 19, which is the record. This is John's personal eyewitness account of the crucifixion and then of the resurrection. So what John is saying here, look, I personally saw the spear of the Roman soldier go into Jesus' side. So water mixed with blood flowed out of his side. Now, by water here, John is probably referring to a light-colored fluid that surrounds the heart in the heart sac. So this would indicate that Jesus' heart had been pierced by the point of this sword. So not just blood, but this water, this watery substance that surrounded the heart in the heart sac also flowed out of his body, which meant that he was dead. That's what John is saying. Look, I saw it with my own eyes. I can bear witness to it. I testify before God that I'm telling you what I saw. The blood and the water flowed from his side in response to the spear shaft of the Roman soldier going into his heart. So Jesus' heart was pierced, and this indicates that Jesus died of a broken heart. Literally, died of a pierced heart. Now, we go back to the beginning of this account, John's narrative. In verse 17, we're told that Jesus began carrying his own cross. Now, what he's referring to here is the cross piece. That's the bar that goes across the top of the cross. that was carried by the victim, by the one who was destined for execution, carried by him to the place of the cross. Now, so Jesus started off carrying this cross. Other accounts, and when he brought the cross piece to the crucifixion site, they just attached the cross piece to the top of the vertical post, which stayed there all of the time, and then they attached the victim, the one who was to be executed, to that cross piece, and the prisoner would carry the means of his own execution to the place of execution. But Jesus was, and they were heavy. And remember now that Jesus had been beaten within an inch of his life by the Roman soldiers. They were trying to beat a confession out of him, and he was so weak from the whippings and the beatings that he collapsed under the weight of the crosspiece, which is why the soldiers recruited Simon of Cyrene, who was an African, by the way, to help carry it the rest of the way. Now, the site of the crucifixion here in John's account is called Golgotha, which is from the Aramaic word for skull. Now, one of the sites that is proposed for the crucifixion has a rock formation that looks amazingly like a skull with the empty eye sockets and everything. So that might have been where Jesus was crucified. The more likely place is the spot where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built, which historians say was built right on the spot of the crucifixion to commemorate the sacrifice and the death of Christ on our behalf. Now, when somebody was executed, the pattern was to put a little placard on the top of the cross that spelled out the crime for which the individual was being executed. So the idea was everybody walking by could read it so they could see why this guy was being hung on a cross. And the point of the placard was, if you don't want to wind up like this guy, if you don't want to wind up on one of these things, then don't do what this guy did. So it was a means of deterrence. Now, what Pilate wrote on that little placard was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Now, this wigged out the politicians of Pilate's day and Jesus' day. The Jewish politicians didn't like it. They went to Pilate to complain. Now, what was even worse is Pilate had written this in the three major languages that were spoken in the civilized world. So no matter where you came from in the world, remember this was Passover, you had people coming from all over the civilized world to be a part of Passover. Every one of them who walked by the crucifixion site would see this placard and see that Pilate, the Roman governor, the supreme political authority in the land, had identified this guy hanging on the cross as the King of the Jews. Again, fulfilling prophecy, even though Pilate just wanted to tweak the Jews. He was tired of the Jews. He was tired of them pestering him. Says, I'm just going to pay them back. I'm going to call Jesus. I know it'll tweak them. I know it'll trigger them, but I'm going to call him the King of the Jews. So that's what the placard on top of the cross. Now, Aramaic was one of the three languages. It was the language of the land of Palestine and Israel and Syria. Greek was the universal language that was spoken all over the civilized world, and Latin was the language of Rome, the language of Roman law and Roman public policy. So anybody from anywhere in the world, remember you had people from all over the world in town for Passover, if you went out to see what all the chaos and shouting was about, this is the inscription that you would see. So the Jews were upset by this when they saw the placard go up, so they went to Pilate and they begged him to rewrite it. From Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, what they wanted him to replace it with, this man said, I am King of the Jews. But remember, Pilate had just about had it with these politicians, tired of them. They were just a big nuisance. So he stared at them and said, what I have written, I have written. He said to them, tough darts, I've written the inscription. There is nothing you can say to make me change my mind. So that bore witness to the entire world that this man was being crucified because he was, in fact, the King of the Jews. So what we see in all of this is God's sovereignty directing all of the events of the trial and the crucifixion. Pilate just wanted to stick this to the Jewish politicians, but he wrote the absolute truth. Pilate became the guy that told the entire world who Jesus was. Who was the guy hanging on the cross? Well, Pilate tells us it is right there, right above him. That's the King of the Jews. Now, several other notes about this crucifixion account. There's several other prophecies about the Messiah that were fulfilled at the foot of the cross. The Roman soldiers divided up his clothes, just like Psalm 22 said, and they gambled for his tunic, again, just like Psalm 22 said. The tunic was the most valuable piece of clothing that Jesus owned. It was one seamless garment, so there's no way to divvy it up. So the Roman soldiers gambled for it at the foot of the cross to decide who would get to walk off with the whole thing. Now, another thing, around the cross, with one exception, everybody there was a woman. It was the women who gathered there at the foot of the cross as Christ was being crucified. John was the only male who was there. The rest of the disciples were hiding under a couch somewhere at home. Now, John stood at the foot of the cross, and these women were completely unafraid, completely unapologetic about publicly demonstrating their loyalty to Christ. I'm struck by the number of women. You look at what's going on in our culture today, struck by the number of women who have taken the lead, wives and mothers who have taken the lead in chastising school boards all across the country for smuggling racist indoctrination into our schools. Very effective advocates for the truth. Now, Jesus also made provision for his mother here. This is an indication that she was a widow, that her husband Joseph had died sometime before. She asked John to look after her. And by the way, she probably was only in her late 40s at this time, maybe her early 50s at the max. But another indication that she was a widow, Joseph had died, and another indication of the responsibility of firstborn sons to make sure that their mothers are taken care of in their senior years. And then we see the conclusion here. As Jesus was hanging on the cross, at the point of death, they soaked a sponge in sour wine and held it up to Jesus. The design here was that the sour wine would jolt the criminal awake to make him suffer as long as possible. And so Jesus received the sour wine. By the way, remember it says that they broke the legs of the criminals are on either side of Jesus. The reason that they did this is when you were a crucifixion victim, your feet rested on a little pedestal. The only way you could breathe would be to lift yourself up with the strength of your legs on that pedestal to inhale, and then you slump back down to exhale. Once you broke their legs, they would asphyxiate because they could not lift themselves up to take another breath. But remember, Jesus was the Passover lamb. The Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the covenant of Moses, was very clear that not a bone of the Passover lamb was to be broken. So even in this, the prophetic words about the Messiah were fulfilled. So Jesus took the sour wine, and he knew somehow in the spirit, in his mind, that the suffering that God had assigned him to endure for the salvation of the world, that it was over. He had drained the cup of God's punishment for sin to the bottom, and his work on earth was done. Verse 28, Jesus knew that all was now finished. Verse 30, he said, "It is finished," bowed his head, and gave up his spirit. Gave up his spirit. His life truly was not taken from him. He yielded it up. He yielded it up. He gave it up for you and me. And that's when he died. When his work on earth for God was done, when it was complete, when it was finished, when he had finished his race, the race marked out for him from the day that Adam and Eve plunged the entire race of man into sin and spiritual darkness. And that, by the way, is when death occurs. It is when the spirit leaves the body, not when the heart stops beating, not when the brain waves stop. Death occurs when the human spirit leaves the body. One last thing, you've probably heard that this phrase, "it is finished," translates a Greek word that was used on receipts. When a bill was paid and the shopkeeper handed you a receipt, it meant paid in full. Your debt has been completely satisfied. And so it was as if Jesus received on the cross at that moment a receipt from his Father. The debt of humanity has been paid. It has been paid in full. So if you ever have any nagging doubts about your salvation, ever doubt whether God's justice has been satisfied in your case, this is your receipt. You pull it out, you look at Christ on the cross, you remind yourself and Satan that the debt for your sin has been paid, it has been paid in full, and that Christ himself is your receipt. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're listening to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Be right back.
This is Focal Point with Bryan Fischer on American Family Radio.
Mike's so hot. Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. Just want to say one thing about one thing that's available at the AFA Resource Center, resources.afa.net. You can pick up my book, The Boy to Man book. I want to read an excerpt from that book today. Here's an excerpt from the book, The Boy to Man book. Quote, the most important decision, this is a father talking to his son, the most important decision you'll ever make in your life is what to do with God. The second most important decision is your choice of a wife. So how do you find the right woman to marry? The question to ask yourself is this: do I want this woman to be the mother of my children? When the answer to that question is yes, you found the woman for you. That's how I recognized Debbie as the woman that I wanted to marry, and she has been everything I could have hoped for as a friend, a partner, a companion, and a mother to my children. I would happily marry her all over again, end quote. You can get your copy again of the Boy to Man book by going to the afastore.net or to resources.afa.net. Maybe just in time to get it to a father that you know and love. All right, well, let's just jump into some sound bites. I keep leaving these things in the can. and I want to see if we can use up the ones. Bobby does a lot of hard work putting these things together. So let's use the labor of Bobby to its ultimate advantage today. Let's start with clip number 1. Let me get that Kamala Harris. This is amazing. On Kamala Harris, her trip to Central and South America, PJmedia.com, Vice President Harris has alarmed, this is the headline, alarmed friend and foe alike after her first foreign trip. So she and her team are frantically right now trying to do damage control. Her trip was an abject failure, and it was a media disaster. You know, she was a politician clearly who was over her head, and it was just awkward and almost painful to watch. And to think that she is next in line for the presidency ought to send shockwaves up the spine of every American. She was flailing about like a fish out of water. She was an embarrassment to the United States of America. Here's how the Chicago Tribune, not a member of the conservative right-wing media, here's how they put it. Kamala Harris interview leads to wish for Biden longevity. That's how bad her trip to South America, it made people want to keep Biden around, even though he obviously is also over his head. So the whole idea was to give her a simple assignment, get her feet wet in foreign policy, prove that she has the goods for the job. Instead, she just bollocksed it up royally, as they say in the UK. We played the soundbite yesterday, I think, where the White House is perplexed. That's the word they used, perplexed by her performance. She couldn't even answer questions that were obvious, questions that were simple, questions she should have been able to answer in her sleep. You know, and the president of Guatemala said the problem here is mixed messaging from the United States. Now, mixed messaging, ladies and gentlemen, is just another word for incompetence. Here's how CNN put it. Kamala referred to Kamala Harris's rocky first foreign trip. They said this week was her first test at the highest levels of statecraft. CNN goes on. The right-wing media is trying to portray Harris as hopelessly inept when it comes to matters at the border. And she gave them an opening by appearing to try to distance herself from the problems there. That's why she didn't want to go to the border. She's in over her head, and she knows it. All right, now, Joe Biden's on his first international trip. Clip number 1, they're speaking at this major Air Force base in England, and Jill is addressing the soldiers there, and Joe is standing behind her with his back turned to the audience that she is speaking to. Jill happens to catch this, and here's what she said in the middle of this event.
Joe, pay attention.
Joe, pay attention. And everybody laughs. You know, and it struck me that Americans who live in crime-ridden cities or along the border, they are saying exactly the same thing. Joe, pay attention. You got families watching inflation. Inflation is highest it's been in several decades, 5% this last year. That's consuming their family resources. By this time next year, inflation will have consumed about 20% of the value of each dollar in your wallet. Your money in your wallet, your currency, is going to be worth 20% less a year or 2 years from now than it is today. And people along the border, they're helpless in the face of this tsunami of illegal alien criminals, so they want to say to Joe Biden, Joe, pay attention. You know, we've been victimized by this pandemic, bought and paid for by Dr. Fauci, which is a metaphor, by the way, for the entire Biden presidency. So people who are victims of COVID want to say, Joe, pay attention. Now, here's the White House clip about the response of the White House to Jill Biden's abysmal diplomatic trip to South America. Clip number 2.
Vice President Kamala Harris back in the United States this morning after a trip to Guatemala and Mexico, her first foreign trip as vice president. This morning, we're told that some of what she said on the trip, her answers to questions, maybe even obvious questions, those answers have White House insiders perplexed.
That's CNN. John Berman, CNN. So White House observers, White House insiders are perplexed because these were obvious questions with obvious answers, and she couldn't even handle them. She bumbled the routine ground balls. And I think the reality is, I've talked about this before, she's a pretty face, but she is not that bright, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we're seeing here. She's in over her head. This game is going too fast for her. She's not going to be able to keep up. Her response to everything when she gets over her head is to cackle, which is not an appealing feature. It's not a good look for the Vice President of the United States. You know, and I've thought from the beginning, look, she is not a serious person. In fact, I don't think anybody in the Biden cabinet, in the Biden White House, any of them, none of them are serious people. I think these people would have a tough time making a student council work in a high school, let alone running the mightiest country in the entire world. Now, here's Joe admitting something that all of us probably knew at one point or another. Again, this is Joe on this international trip yesterday, says this, clip 3.
I keep forgetting I'm president.
And I thought to myself, we should all be so lucky. All right, now here is Ben Domenech. He's with The Federalist, which is an outstanding conservative publication. I read it frequently, probably consult it just about every day doing show prep. And he's the editor-in-chief at The Federalist. And here is his take on Kamala Harris, clip number 4.
Well, I think that following on Matthew's point, the problem that Kamala Harris has experienced in her political career is that she leans so heavily into this sort of live femme, girl boss, yes queen type approach to answering questions that it often comes across as unserious or flippant. And I think that on this question, which is central for a lot of Americans today, a priority for many of us, it does seem like the administration is just simply not taking this all that seriously.
Just not taking this all that seriously. This is something I have said from day one with this administration. These are not serious people. They're treating this as some kind of big game, like it's Sim City. We can move the pieces around away from the border. We can move Border Patrol away from the border, and it's just like a game. There aren't any consequences, and yet people are getting killed. Businesses are being destroyed. People are in danger because of this. Now, here's CBS. Again, this is not a conservative media outlet. This is CBS talking about what is happening on our southern border. This is CBS now, clip number 5.
Jacob is among the more than 88,000 Americans who died from overdoses in the 12 months ending October 2020, up 19,000 from the same period a year before.
It'll live with me for the rest of my life. My wife had to watch as I screamed and begged for my son to breathe.
Border Patrol agent Jerry Galvan knows heartbreak like that often starts here.
They cut into it and set it up beforehand so they know where they're going to be coming through.
As agents say, the cartels use a flood of migrants to move a river of drugs.
So, so this is another example of what we're talking about. There's a real human cost to this. This is not a game. That's why I accuse these people of not being serious people. If you are a serious person, you want to stop this kind of suffering. Here's a father had to watch his son twitch until he died from a drug overdose, and Biden is allowing these drugs to cross our border in a tsunami, a river of drugs, to use the expression from this CBS piece. So they know that got drugs coming across the border. They are simply uninterested in fixing it. And CNN is not that interested in fixing it. Or CBS, and part of it is if they know that this is a ratings winner for them. Their ratings are in the tank since Trump left office, but they know that people will watch newscasts that feature disaster, that feature people and communities ravaged by drugs. That's better for ratings. So they're content to see this continue. Now, here is clip number 6. This is CNN now. Just heard from CBS. Here is CNN talking again about the same issue of drugs coming across the border, clip 6.
Last year, by this time, 45 migrants had died on the border. This year, that number has nearly tripled to at least 128.
All right. So a year ago, you had 60 people dying along the border. Now it is 128. So in other words, people are dying. This was just a year ago. Remind me, who was president of the United States a year ago? CNN can't seem to remember or put it together. 60 people died at the border last year, same time. Today it's 128. Now this points to another lesson from this disaster at the border. Listen to me carefully here, because we need to understand this and believe it. Border security is good for Americans, but it is not just good for Americans. It is also good for illegal aliens who aren't going to be drowning in the Rio Grande, aren't going to be hijacked by drug cartel people coming to the border. Now, people all the way up the chain are not serious. I'm going to give you an example. Here's the Attorney General of the United States. This is Merrick Garland. This is the guy, remember, that Barack Obama wanted to put on the Supreme Court bench instead of the guy that we got, Gorsuch. This was the guy that was supposed to be the Supreme Court guy instead of Neil Gorsuch. So fortunately, this guy didn't make it. But I want you to listen to him and see if this guy sounds like a serious attorney general. This is the chief attorney, criminal prosecutor in the United States of America, the number one guy that's in charge of dealing with crime and prosecuting those who commit crime in America. So he is being questioned here. I believe this is by Lindsey Graham, clip number 7. Let's listen.
Do you believe there's a crime wave in the United States regarding violent crime?
I think there's a serious, significant rise in major violent crime beginning last year. Yes, I do.
You're dead right. Atlanta's 59% increase in homicides, Chicago 56, Houston 42, Portland 800%, LA County 127%, Atlanta 63%. The numbers are pretty staggering. What do you think has caused that? Is it possible that some of the rhetoric about defunding the police and actually reducing police capability has created some of the problems?
I just don't know. There are a lot of factors here, of course, the biggest one being the pandemic, and I just don't know at this point how to disaggregate.
So you think the pandemic's more of a root cause than declaring war on the police?
No, sir, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Oh, man. The staggering level of abject ignorance. Now, I believe Merrick Garland knows, but he doesn't want us to know that he knows, because then he could be held accountable for not doing anything about this. So his answer to everything, Graham says, what do you think caused this rise in violent crime? We just don't know. Do you think that the rhetoric about defunding the police has created some of these problems? I just don't know. Do you think the pandemic is more of a root cause than declaring war on the police? No, sir, I don't know. I honestly do not know. You know, one of the things the president of El Salvador said down there, that El Salvador used to be the murder capital of the world. He was not exaggerating. The per capita rate of murder in El Salvador was higher than it is anywhere in the world. But we had got a handle on our gang problem. Remember, MS-13 is big down there. That's where they started. And we got a control of that. And now our murder rate, we're safer than the city of Chicago. If you want a safe place to live in Central America, El Salvador would be the place to come. If you can move from Chicago to El Salvador, you ought to do it, because our murder rate isn't anywhere near the size of the one in Chicago. Now, I will have to save that one for the next segment. But I got a story here about what's going on in Portland. Portland's nickname is the City of Roses. Beautiful city. I've been there many times. I spent a summer in Portland going to grad school, and they are just rocking and reeling from deadly gang violence. And the police sergeant said, people are scared, they're angry, they're fed up. You know who is not scared in Portland? The bad guys. They're not scared of the police. They're not scared of anything. They've got free reign. Nobody's going to stop them. The police force in Portland has been decimated. The city council took millions of dollars, transferred it to social causes, leaving the people undefended. We'll be right back.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Bryan Fischer.
Bryan Fischer.
Mics are hot. Welcome back to Focal Point, the home of the fastest 60 minutes in American media. Also the home of high-definition radio, trying to bring you more content per cubic inch of airtime than any other place on your media dial. Talking again about Portland, how they are reeling. Everybody in Portland is scared except for the gang members. They've got Disneyland. They can roam wherever they want. Nobody is going to interfere with them. Nobody's going to tell them no. Nobody's going to arrest them. Nobody's going to put them in prison for what they are doing. This is from Fox News. When Portland had a rampant gang problem 30 years ago, detectives were stunned if they found more than a few dozen bullet casings after a shooting. Now, police are recording multiple shootings a week with 50 to 70 shots fired. I mean, this is a war zone. This is not one of the great American cities. This is a war zone. In one case, they've had 150 shots fired in a gang attack, retaliatory shootings from gangs, spiraling into this vicious cycle. Police estimate that half of the shootings this year were gang-related. But what the city council did is they drained the city budget by $27 million. $27 million. They're down 100 police, and they're having difficulty recruiting. Who wants to go to work if you're a peace officer in the city of Portland? You got no support from your city government. They're trying to reduce your pay, reduce your salary, reduce the budget that is necessary. You know, what they're doing in Portland now, according to this Fox News story, is gangs are not waiting. Typically what gangs would do, you shoot one of ours, we're going to come around and shoot one of yours. But now you're in a tit-for-tat cycle where instead of waiting, they immediately start shooting again at the rival gangs at places such as vigils. So people are there to remember the one who has departed, the one who was a victim of gun violence, and the gangs show up and start shooting at the people who are there, sometimes wounding as many as 7 people in a single event. And the police say you have multiple shooters. That's a new phenomenon. Used to be one shooter. Now you've got multiple shooters at these events. You have multiple guns and lots of shots being fired. This is the police sergeant who's in charge of the Portland police deal. The police staff is the lowest it's been in decades. There are 100 officers short of authorized strength, but they can't find people to hire. Who wants to go to work there? If you're a police officer, who wants to serve in the city of Portland? So, and you know, despite the fact that they're appealing for more help, for more funds, slash the budget by $27 million, where did that money go? Well, anyway, went other places, not important, just did not go into policing the city. Now, here's where this gets you when you accommodate this violence. You don't push back on it. You don't arrest. You don't indict. You don't prosecute. You don't convict. You don't lock up. This is New York. A New York judge released a teen criminal for the 3rd time over the last year. He's been arrested on gun possession charges, released again for the 3rd time in a year, and he went out and shot and killed a 34-year-old father of 4. He is reportedly a gang member, so they know who this guy is. They've got his gang sheet right in front of them. And he was released by a member of the New York City Supreme Court Justice. Twice he's been released, according to the New York Post, by this same judge. Now, prosecutors had looked to try this guy as an adult, but Judge Boyle, this New York City Supreme Court Justice, he refused. Dropped the case down to family court. So that's not a serious thing. So the prosecutors in New York are not serious people. The judges in New York are not serious people. Here's what's going on in Baltimore. You've got 40 restaurants and shops in the Fells Point neighborhood, which apparently is a reasonably peaceful, stable, Tony neighborhood in Baltimore. But they're just being overrun with violence. They're facing prostitution right on the front sidewalk. They've got public urination right on the front sidewalk. They have defecation taking place right in sight of diners on public sidewalks. And they're threatening to do a Boston Tea Party. We are just not going to pay our taxes until we get better police, better services, more police and better services. We need the city to come in and help pick up the trash. We need police to enforce traffic and parking laws. We need to stop open air alcohol and drug sales, drug dens on the corner, people selling stuff hand over fist. And we need to take away the hobbles that keep the police from being able to do their job. So that's going on in Portland. And this is, interestingly enough, I mean, coincidentally not, the chief prosecutor, her name is Marilyn Mosby, we run into her before. In March, she announced, she's the chief prosecutor there, she would permanently suspend prosecution of prostitution, prosecution of drug possession, prosecution of minor traffic offenses, and a whole raft of quality of life crimes. So the bad guys now know we're not going to be prosecuted. We can't get in trouble for prostitution. We can't get in trouble for drug possession. We can't get in trouble for mining traffic offenses. So it's ollie oxen free for the criminal element in Baltimore. You know, this critical race theory, here's an employer who is the publisher, who's editor of First Things. Now, First Things is a very good conservative magazine. It's a religious public policy magazine, and the editor of First Things wrote an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and he says, "Look, I have stopped hiring. I've stopped hiring graduates from Ivy League schools. These are the people that are graduating from the schools with the highest reputation in the United States. I'm not hiring them anymore because they are too woke when they get here. They're too self-important because they've been inflated by their prestigious schools with a sense of their importance, or they have been trained in these elite educational environments to stay silent when it matters to speak up. When things are happening that ought to be spoken against, they're too afraid. They've been intimidated into silence by these elite schools." He said this a decade ago: "I relish the opportunity to employ talented graduates of Princeton, Yale, Harvard, and the rest. Today, not so much. I got people now that think they're too important. You can't teach them anything. They want to run the shop. And others are intimidated completely into silence, won't speak up when that needs to happen. If students," he says, "can be traumatized by insensitivity on that leafy campus, then they're unlikely to function as effective team members in an organization that has to deal with everyday realities." In other words, if they can't handle insensitivity on a college campus, they are going to be useless and worthless in the real world. I cannot take the chance. And he says this: "I find myself wondering about the silent acquiescence of most students." This is the paragraph I want you to hear. "They allow themselves to be cowed by charges of racism and other sins. But I do not," he says, "want to hire a person who is well practiced in remaining silent when it costs something to speak up." So anyway, that is going on. So now some of these people are going to find out, these graduates of Ivy League universities, thinking that their graduate diploma was a ticket to fame and fortune, going to find they may have trouble finding jobs anywhere. Now, I mentioned women speaking up against this racism, this critical race theory, which is just a way to insert racist indoctrination into our schools. And here is a Chinese woman. She lived through Mao's communist regime before she moved to America. She spoke at her local school board, and she had a son graduate from Loudoun County High School 2015, and she was speaking at a Loudoun County school board. Here's what she had to say, clip number 8.
"I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. During the Cultural Revolution, I witnessed students and teachers turn against each other. We changed school names to be politically correct. We were taught to denounce our heritage. The Red Guards destroy anything that is not communist, old statues, books, and anything else. We are also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the bias reporting system. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools."
You know, good for her, and good for women like her. We need more of that courage that she's showing in the men in our culture. But often, you never want to question the courage, the bravery of an American mother. She's going to bat for her kids. You better stay out of her way. Get in front of a mother bear. Look out, because you may wind up with some claw marks down your back. And she said what happened in China is that schools started changing the names of their schools to be politically correct. That happened in China. Only there they used class instead of race to divide people, but it is the same thing. In China, quote, "We were taught to denounce our heritage. Red Guards destroyed anything that's not communist, statues, books, and anything else." So they went after statues in communist China because of what these statues representative. We were encouraged to report on each other, to rat each other out. And she said, what we're dealing with in America with this cultural racism theory is we are dealing with the American version of the Chinese cultural revolution. She says, look, this thing has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our system of education. So that's what this Chinese mother said in Loudoun County. All right, let's shift gears a little bit to talk about our favorite public official, former public official, Anthony Fauci. Yeah, I guess he is the favorite public official of a lot of Americans. Here's Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, and he's talking here about this COVID thing and Dr. Fauci's role in it. Clip number 9.
I like Dr. Fauci. I respect Dr. Fauci. But Dr. Fauci needs to cut the... This isn't about Dr. Fauci. It's not about his feelings, and I'm sorry if his feelings were hurt. You know, maybe he ought to buy an emotional support pony. But we're not debating dance moves on TikTok here. We're talking about millions of human lives. And here's what we know. Dr. Fauci gave a lot of U.S. taxpayer money to the Wuhan lab for Chinese scientists to research bat coronaviruses. Neither Dr. Fauci nor any of his people can guarantee us that the Chinese scientists didn't use that money to do gain-of-function research and turn a normal virus into a supercharged virus.
So once again, Dr. Fauci paid for the coronavirus that's taken the lives of 300 and some thousand American people. Now, Senator Kennedy wasn't done yet. Here's his second clip, clip number 10.
Since 1992, there have been 11 different experiments, widely reported, in which scientists throughout the world and labs throughout the world have taken a normal virus and turned it into a supercharged pathogen. Number two, the biosecurity, and this is in terms of the lab leak, the biosecurity at the Wuhan lab sucked. We know that from American intelligence. And China has a history of lab leaks, 1977, 2004, 2019. Also, since day one, Dr. Fauci and expert friends have told us, look, the virus occurred naturally. It jumped from a bat through an intermediate host into human beings. Well, it's been a year. Where's the proof? Where's the smoking bat?
Where is the smoking bat that would prove your theory? Reality is they do not have a smoking bat. So I think the hypothesis that this was bioengineered in that virology lab in Wuhan, which we have said here on this program from day one of this scamdemic, entirely self-inflicted, fueled by hysteria and fear, not by science, not by data, but by an agenda. By an agenda to get as much money into the pockets of pharmaceutical companies as possible, and in order to intimidate and frighten the people into doing whatever they are told, even wearing masks while they're riding bicycles, when we know now from science that masks cannot do one single solitary thing to stop COVID. All right, very quickly, talk about people being triggered by something. Here is a reporter for the New York Times talking about what triggered her over Memorial Day weekend.
I was on Long Island this weekend visiting a really dear friend, and I was really disturbed. I saw, dozens and dozens of pickup trucks with, explicatives against Joe Biden on the back of them, Trump flags, and some cases just dozens of American flags, which, is also just disturbing because essentially the message was clear. It was, this is my country. This is not your country. I own this. And so until we're ready to have that conversation, this is going to continue.
So wigged out that she might have to look at American flags. Bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap where God has placed you. Never forget, we are fighting a winnable war. See you back here tomorrow.